Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name's Jessica Ward King, also known as the Stigma Crusher. Here at this channel, we deal with issues of mental health and mental illness from my twin perspectives as a person with lived experience of bipolar II disorder, as well as a person with a PhD in experimental psychology. If that sounds like your jam, you are in the right place. I would absolutely recommend that you hit that subscribe button. And if you want to be notified every single week when I post, hit that notifications bell as well. Well, with that, I guess it's time for us to start crushing stigma for this week. Okay, guys, so today's topic is high functioning mental illness. So as an example of what is high functioning, would you guess, for example, that I am suffering with a particularly severe episode of depression right now? Of course you wouldn't. I'm smiling, I'm laughing, I'm wearing bright colors, I've got my makeup on and my hair done nicely, my voice is modulated, moving up and down, I'm moving fluidly. I do not have the look of someone with severe depression. Okay, but I am. And you know what? This isn't a put on either. This is what I look like when I get in front of people or the camera, assuming that you guys are people too. This is just how I cope. It is how I behave. I have always done this. It's always been my reality. And so when the question is, what does it feel like to be a person with high functioning depression? It feels like a sham. It feels like I am pulling the wool over the world's eyes. And you know what? The world seems to think so too, to a certain extent anyway. So we're going to unpack this idea of high functioning mental illness, what it means, what it doesn't mean, and finish off by my thoughts on living as a person with high functioning depression in my case. So let's get into this then. So high functioning specifically means that a person with an illness does not look as though they are struggling as deeply as their illness or the severity of their illness would suggest. And so for depression, as I mentioned, you might expect me to look one way, for example, less energy, slumping shoulders, perhaps unkempt or poor habits, daily habits. You might expect for me to move more slowly. You might expect to see red eyes. You might expect to see quite a lot of different things depending on what symptoms of depression the person is experiencing. Or, like with me, you may see none of them or fewer of them. And that is what we talk about when we're high functioning. And the idea there is that it's really all about a level of functioning, a level of being able to be in the world, to act in the world, to do the things that life dictates you should do, to do the things that you dictate that you'd like to do. And that's the functioning that is at a higher level than what you might expect. So you might ask yourself, where did we get this whole idea of what you see and what you get, basically? Within Western medicine, there are two ways of knowing about disease, or at least for the clinician, from their point of view. And the first is the sign. A sign in Western medicine refers to something that the clinician can experience, can see, can feel, can taste, indeed, can smell, that they can actually objectively find on the person's body or experience that they don't need that patient to tell them about. They can see it for themselves. That's a sign. The other is a symptom, And a symptom is what the patient themselves experiences. And so me saying, oh, gee, I have a pain in my arm. Doctor, there's a pain in my arm, is a symptom. The doctor coming and palpating and doing an x-ray and so on, that might be looking for a sign. So for mental illness, there are quite a lot of symptoms. Not all, certainly. When we looked at the symptoms of mania, hypomania, and depression in a couple of videos ago, we saw quite a few things that were certainly signs, and some of those that I've mentioned today about depression. For hypomania, for example, it might be excess energy, pacing. The clinician can actually see you pacing, can see you moving too fast, can see you speaking too fast. They can hear the pitch of your voice as it constricts and gets higher. But what you would have as a person that is struggling with hypomania would be symptoms like, I just feel like my thoughts are running away from me, or thoughts racing. So symptoms are the patient's own experiences of their illness. Signs are the clinician's experiences. Which do you imagine? Now just think for a moment, which do you imagine Western medicine seems to prize over the other? Did you guess signs? Well, you would be right. So something that a clinician can use their powers of deduction to determine and see, regardless of what your experience is seen as the most valid thing that one can see about a patient. It's much more real. It can't be manipulation, which is not surprisingly, I suppose, something that's worried about in psychiatry, that folks would be putting it on or be manipulating the system. And so being able to see those signs is really indicative of a more solid diagnosis, a better diagnosis, probably a worse experience, they would probably feel. And that those folks that are, mostly diagnosed based on symptoms, that it's much more flimsy, it's much less real, it's much less worthy of treatment, really, than folks that are showing those signs. So mental illness operates on the signs-symptoms dichotomy. Let's be fair, a good clinician will use the signs if they're there, but will prize the symptoms as well, particularly with mental illness, but with any kind of illness, really. The patient's own experience of their bodies, of their psyches, and of their lives has got to be one of the highest forms of evidence when talking about people's bodies, people's lives, and people's psyches. And so it would be completely foolish for anyone, clinician or anyone else included, to really discount those symptoms quite so heavily as I might be insinuating. And yet, I have had those clinicians. I have had experiences where I was told, well, you don't look like you should, so we're not going to treat you, we're not going to admit you, we're going to send you back out into the world. Oh, you're threatening suicide? That's unfortunate for you. You don't look like you're supposed to, and so we're going to send you back out into the world. I've had those experiences. If you've also had those experiences, chime in down below, because unfortunately they are less rare than we all might like to think. But in general, a good clinician and a good friend and a good family would be able to take those symptoms and really understand that is real as well. The problem, dear fellow persons with mental illness, that we have is that we internalize that stigma that we are getting from the medical establishment and from the world in general. And so when the people are telling us that that we don't look sick and we don't need treatment, we hear it often enough, we tend to believe it. And so I have been known to tell myself more regularly than I care to admit that I don't have as valid an illness as somebody else. I am not worthy of treatment as someone else is. I'm not worthy of empathy. I'm not worthy of love and care. I should just really get on with it, because if this is what I look like, I should just go acting like it. That's that self stigma. I've taken it from the outside world. I've taken it from the medical establishment and from, pop culture and from friends and family, and I've really just turned it against myself, weaponized it against myself. That's something that's really damaging in this experience of being high functioning. And so, if you are friends and family members, do keep that in mind. It can be really difficult sometimes. Can be difficult for my spouse when I walk out the room looking like this and then immediately kind of collapse. She's like, where did all this energy go? Like, what's going on? How do I understand this? It is difficult. Fortunately, for me, she's very understanding. I've been with her a very long time, and she has seen some of those signs, some of the downs that have helped her to understand my experience. And so that's been something that's been fortunate for me. But if you are someone that is loving someone with high functioning mental illness, try to keep it in mind. And so my experience as being a high functioning person with depression is not all bad. I know that I'm very fortunate in that I am able to continue to work. So I am able, like I said, to do my job. Is it possibly the most brilliant performances of my entire career? Maybe not always. But I am able to put in my shift, do my job, remain, proud of what I've done. And I've also been able to maintain some social relationships. So if I wasn't having a high functioning appearance, it would be difficult to go to dinner or drinks or Zoom meets with folks and be able to keep interest and have them keep my interest, and just in general be able to share and laugh and do all of those socially acceptable things that one must do in social encounters. I don't have all the energy to do maybe all of the social encounters that I could, but I'm able to maintain some. I was able to court my partner when I was not doing very well at all. And so, being able to maintain some of those relationships has been really helpful to me, and I'm very grateful. I'm also, I realize, very privileged. I can choose to pass as a person that is not struggling with mental illness. And so, unlike folks who really can't help it any other way, I am able to do these things, go to work, have social interactions where I can choose to pass as somebody that's typically behaving, I guess. Typical mental health, let's put it that way. And that is a privilege. It's a privilege to have. Now, there's also, going along with that, I would sometimes give my left arm to not pass, because as I mentioned, this is really a reflexive performance. It's simply the way that I behave. It actually takes energy to go, oh my gosh, yes, I can be myself, and go back to a more normal resting state that is actually, pathologically depressed. And so, yes, I'm privileged, but at the same time, sometimes I wish that I could just look like I feel. And then maybe the empathy would come. And then maybe I'd be able to, be seen and be heard and be understood by other people who, unless they are fortunate enough to see me like that, have absolutely no conception, even when I tell them. Even when I verbally explain what is depression and what is my experience, it's not nearly the same when I'm doing it while looking like this. So that's the positives, and starting to get into the negatives. Other things that are negatives. One is that medical care can be difficult. Good care can be difficult to come by. If you've got yourself a clinician that thinks that if they can't see it, it's not actually there, and that you don't deserve treatment, it can be a really hard go. I've had those clinicians in psychiatry. I've had those clinicians in neurology as well. And it's so infuriating and exhausting and just soul destroying when you go to a clinician for help and you receive that kind of stigma. It's extremely difficult to take. Another of the negatives is that the things that I'm doing in my life as I'm going through on this, beautiful autopilot, are maybe not the things that I'd like to be doing, or the way in which I'd like to be doing them. There are plenty of pursuits I would have loved to have taken up during this pandemic, but haven't the energy by the time I do this for an entire day, every day for the week. I'm just, there's nothing left. And so it's not all high function for sure. Another of the things is the social aspect. It is so freaking lonely to not be seen, to not be understood, to have friends that say to you like, well, you look fine. What's your problem? You should really have more gratitude. You should really take some time to pray. You should really take a bath. It'll help you center yourself. Have you read such and such an author? Those from friends, from colleagues that I would have loved to have a great relationship with. But it's not possible like this. They cannot possibly understand, no matter what I tell them. They cannot understand. And how can I really blame them when I look like this? And I'm telling them at the same time, yes, I'm severely depressed. Yes, I am. All the way down there. Yep. Mm-hmm. And that's why I say I would love just for a few times to actually look congruent with how I'm feeling. Would I give up my privilege to pass, to have that mood congruence? I don't know that I would. But if I could just a little bit, if I could half and half it, if I could use my high functioning nature when it suits me, that's what I would really want, is to be able to use this as a coping skill, but to also be able to turn it off again when I want to. And so I guess when you ask me, what is it like to be a high functioning person with mental illness? I guess a sham was pretty accurate. That's how it feels to me. I'm self-stigmatizing and I'm down on myself about it. But I guess that's how I feel about it. I'd love for you guys to leave your comments down below. What are your experiences with high-functioning mental illness or illness of any kind? Do you have any tips and tricks of ways that you cope, whether you are high-functioning or not? Have you got any stories of where you were really able to connect with someone even though your high-functioning nature made it more difficult for them to see? I'd love to hear it all down in the comments, and I will always reply. I hope you guys have a great week, whatever that looks like for you. Remember to be kind to yourself, Jessica says to herself. Remember that self-stigma is very rarely correct, and that anything that's telling you that you're not worthy of treatment or of empathy or of a decent healthcare provider is definitely wrong. You might have to fight with it for yourself, but try to remember, and I'll try to remember too. Take care. No, you know what? You know what? I've had a time to think about this. You know what I wish? I wish that my natural way of being, which by the way, I can't turn off. I mentioned that already, but I can't turn it off. I can choose to turn it on, I suppose, but I can't choose to turn it off. And I wish that my way of being was understood and recognized by others, those around me, my loved ones, my medical practitioners, as a valid way of being, as a way of being that requires care and that deserves care and deserves treatment. I wish that it, just because I presented differently, just because my signs are different than somebody else's, that didn't reflect on the way that I was treated as a person or as a person with a mental illness. That's what I wish. Yeah, that. Thanks. See you next week.
Stigma Crusher.